I'm Susan Bell. I'm working with the university on an initiative that has so many applications to what we've been talking about this morning. I've had goosebumps. Today, I know we are going, I'm looking forward to this conversation. We're all very realistic about how quickly 30 minutes will go. So I'm hopeful that what we do is kick off a conversation that as we shift into lunch, the discussions this afternoon, and into the weeks and months beyond, that there'll be an opportunity for you to talk to each of these gentlemen. What I'd like to do is ask each one, beginning with Joe and then with Mike, to briefly introduce themselves and their firm. It looks like we may be just passing mics here. So we'll begin with Joe. And again, after we do that, we're going to talk a little bit about an initiative that they're both working on in Wyoming that I find fascinating.
Excellent. All right, let me try it again. Try this one. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Idaho National Lab, the Frontiers Project, and everybody here in Alaska. This is my second full day in Alaska, and I'm really enjoying it, enjoying the conversation so far, and really excited about this topic. So BWXT, we manufacture a variety of different reactor systems for the Naval Reactors Program, for the CANDU fleet in Canada, and then components for all nuclear projects worldwide. And in Advanced Technologies, the business unit that I run, we focus on three sectors: space reactors, the Department of Defense microreactor project Pele that Jeff Waxman talked about earlier, and then the commercial segment, which we'll talk about more here in the next few minutes.
I'm Mike Wandler. I'm the president and one of the owners of L&H Industrial, Inc. We manufacture and repair the largest machines on Earth, mostly in mining. Been around since the 60s. I've been in the business for 40 years now. And I got interested in nuclear a few years ago when Peter D. Mendes said that nuclear is the only answer to the carbon problem. And so I started networking with the Wyoming government and the governor of Wyoming, and TerraPower was coming in, and decided that my life's purpose is to innovate energy. So through that, I got interested in manufacturing parts for nuclear, and very quickly came to the microreactors because it needs a supply chain, and I wanted to enter that supply chain, and through that, trying to grow and diversify the economy of Wyoming, I set up the Wyoming Innovative Entrepreneurs at the request of the governor of Wyoming to help grow and diversify the Wyoming economy. I was in the business council for a few years, but that doesn't work very good for an entrepreneur being in a government agency. So I decided I could do more good just doing it in an entrepreneurial way. So I've networked all of the tried and true entrepreneurs in Wyoming, and we are looking at entering the supply chain, not only for nuclear and not only for microreactors, but for just to grow and diversify in whatever they want to do as the globe changes into the net zero. And through all of that, I started the last company that I fired up called Evercore Energy to buy these reactors, the microreactors, and lease the energy to heavy industrial customers. So my customers that are in mining and heavy industrial. So I've got three pieces: Wyoming Innovative Entrepreneurs, Evercore Energy, and L&H Industrial that I'm working.
Well, as I mentioned, when I was working, we'll give it a moment. When I was talking a little bit with Jennifer and Christy and others in preparing for today, one of the things that really interested me was the governor's energy matching fund for Wyoming. And if I'm correct, there was $100 million. I'd like to ask, starting with Mike, about that and how important those incentives and that support, and then turn to Joe to talk a little bit about the project. And I know you're working together on that. But if you can describe, since it's in your home state, the genesis of that, and also, I mean, I think building on the comments made today, in my experience, having worked in private sector, having worked as Commerce Commissioner, now with the university, things really, Christy had an economic development word for it, but when you've got the private sector, the governor, the legislature, policymakers aligned, it seems like you can really do things. So if you can just describe that initiative, and then we'll talk about the mechanics of it.
Yeah, so the initiative is to diversify the economy or grow the economy. In my opinion, the best way you can do that is to get the entrepreneurs that are going to do that with or without the government's help. And get the resources behind them. So in this instance, it's money. So entrepreneurs are going to grow and diversify and put their own money in, go borrow money from banks and other places. If the government puts in direct money with the right entrepreneurs, I think you triple that investment in 3 years, and then it compounds every year. So it's really a no-brainer when you run the math on it when you sit in my seat as an entrepreneur. So Governor Gordon and I and many others were talking about it, and he decided to put, I think it was, Marcio would know, 150 million, 200 million into this governor matching fund, and he signed that to the Wyoming Energy Authority to get people interested in coming to Wyoming and growing and diversifying energy. And part of that was nuclear. So they have they put that up. People are applying for that money. It gets people interested in the state, right? Because there's nothing like setting up some money, matching funds, in order to get them to come to your state and talk to you about what you're willing to do. What do you want to do? So it was brilliant. It's worked incredibly well. Wyoming Energy Authority and Marcio did a great job of administering it, and that's where BWXT and I come in, and it's a model that others should look at and do. There's a lot of politics in that model, but it really works, and if you can keep it to where you're trying to incentivize the right entrepreneurs in your state to and bring in other entrepreneurs, it's powerful.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, having all those elements, having the matching funds from the governor was important, having an energy authority that's very lean forward and getting the project done the right way the first time, and then having Idaho National Lab involved as well as fostering that relationship, really connecting the microreactor vendor, BWXT, to the state, and then determining what the different phases needed to be. So the first phase is really just understanding the problem. Like any good problem-solving technique, understand the problem first, understand what attributes need to be applied to solve that problem, and then determining what a ramp plan looks like to propagate that technology for the greater good of Wyoming in this case. So what we'll be doing in the first phase is using the money that we have, the cost-sharing money that we have in BWXT with the Energy Authority, with LNH and several others, the Trona Patch, and everybody that has a driving need for energy, distributed energy in Wyoming, is determining how our microreactor technology can be assembled, applied to provide that energy from both thermal and electrical cases. And so once we've established that, we understand what the system needs to look like. We come up with a system that runs independent for the first unit, but it becomes quickly part of a fleet model. So these aren't going to be individual reactors for each individual site. It will be a reactor system that has an application that can be duplicated and triplicated and become that big fleet model and become something that's very cost conscious and drive down the overall energy delivery, which allows microreactors to be that solution for the future. And so it needs to be an enduring solution. And so when Jeff was talking about one reactor is not the point here. It's really about multiple reactors. How can we apply nuclear to solve these big problems? And it's something that I'm extremely excited about. Also excited that we're already building that first reactor. So when we talk about what is the next step is already happening. We've made multi-million-dollar procurements already on all of the equipment that has to be installed and integrated and initially tested and preparing to ship this reactor and the fuel to Idaho National Lab to prove this technology. So it's not if, it's when, and when has already been decided. In the next few years, we will be operating a microreactor in this country. So finding the use cases that make the most sense is the way to go about it. And then using that not just from a technology and an industrial case, but also to socialize how this technology can be used and further propagated through the United States and used for diplomatic purposes as well.
Well, and it sounds, it recognized some commonalities I think in a small state, people wear many hats. It sounds, through our prior conversations and today, Mike, you were involved in helping shaping the opportunity, but your family of companies are also involved with BMXT. If you'll talk about your role in this, and which may span many hats. It may be LNH, it may be the innovators group, it may be other aspects. But just where did you come back into the initiative once it was created?
Yeah, so BWXT applied for the matching funds, and they won that. And they're one of their charges in that, one of the things they're going to do is look across Wyoming for customers for the microreactors, and identifying which customers it fits. And then the suppliers, so the vendors. So that's the opportunity for me and the Wyoming Innovative Entrepreneurs to say, well, what do you need? Where are the white spaces, right? So there's some things they do. There's other things that they like to source, and there's other things that are the most exciting, the white spaces that aren't yet taken care of. So working with BWXT to understand the white spaces, and then I'm going to use Wyoming Innovative Entrepreneurs website to expose those to everybody in Wyoming, and anybody in the world can look at that. And then engaging with them to say who wants to do this. So which entrepreneurs, and one of the things the Innovative Entrepreneurs does is it qualifies those vendors. So we know which ones are going to do what needs to be done and going to present well for BWXT. So setting up that supply chain, and that's not only for manufactured parts, machine things like I do, or engineered things. It's also dirt work, right? It's the fences. It's everything that you need to do. And I think getting in early on that with BWXT, which already does this, right? They've built over 400 reactors. It's a real great position that Wyoming has gotten in, and all we're doing is activating the rest of the Wyoming entrepreneurs. For L&H, it's it's going to be machining, it's going to be manufacturing parts, and then for Evercore, it's going to be the reactor owner and leasing that energy globally or locally and then globally. So that is a really interesting business model. So creating business models as well.
Well, in this question, I'll start with Joe, and Mike, you might want to add. Reading a little bit about the application, I know, one, you've mentioned it's phased. Two, there's some things that are specifically tailored to Wyoming and its industry. So recognizing what we're trying to do is have something that can be replicated. Can you talk a little bit about what's specific to Wyoming, and then because we're in Alaska, what could be instantly applicable or tailored? Just how does this work?
Yeah, and I'll first talk about why it will work, and it's because we're taking that phased approach. And understanding all the input requirements, what we have focused on is the Trona patch first. So the Trona patch is enormous. It has a lot of deep-pocketed investment, and the industrial customers are very interested in the Trona patch removing their carbon footprint. So all of those things with a huge desire that comes from those companies that run the Trona patch, and a state that is deeply interested in decarbonizing and then providing all the resources they need to that Trona patch was really important. So back to your question, understanding what that blueprint will look like is phase one, and that blueprint will be specific to Wyoming's use cases, but what goes into that blueprint can be applied to Alaska, can be applied to Utah, can be applied to Idaho, all the frontiers states. So once we've established that, that's something that we can share. I would imagine Marcio would want to share that with these other states, and it's a way to not just say that we are going to put a microreactor inside of the state of Wyoming. This is exactly how we're going to do that. And these are all the driving requirements to make the decisions that we've made. And the system isn't going to change wildly from one application to another, but there will be some components, site preparation, other things that Mike talked about that will be very unique, especially with the Arctic climate here in Alaska. And so the short answer is the two phases. Phase one is to create a blueprint for Wyoming, but that can be translatable to any other environment. And then phase two is starting this fleet model, starting with that first reactor, and quickly on the heels of that first reactor, developing 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 reactors, so we can continue to keep all of the work that we put into it, both from the supply chain, the manufacturing, and the operations model, all to work for the greater good.
Well, and Mike, if you want to add anything either on contributing to that tailoring to Wyoming or the applicability in Alaska, recognizing, that as we look around our state, we have, commonalities, mining, oil and gas, we have aerospace, we have, there's a lot of things that your company's involved in. And then I have a follow-up after that for you.
Yeah, so there's room for everybody. So anybody that wants to come in and actually wants to get this done, there's room. This is a great opportunity for energy. It's we're not going to be able to handle it all in Wyoming, right? We're going to try to take the pieces off, and I love Wyoming. I was born and raised in Wyoming, and I have a lot of care and nurturing. But I'm a global entrepreneur, so I buy and sell all over the world, and actually microreactors to me are a much more interesting global play for my customers than they are United States play. In the United States, we have low-cost, abundant energy. Alaska, not as much, but in the rest of the United States, we're pretty spoiled. I think we're going to go through a period here where we're not, and we'll correct that because entrepreneurs will stand up and the government will stand up and fix it. But there's room for everybody, and I would like to see multiple microreactor manufacturers that are really robust, and I would like to see multiple vendors for everything that those same reactor manufacturers need, right? And even multiple leasing companies. You know, I set up Evercore. Evercore is going to be able to do a few a year, right? Maybe 100 a year, but there needs to be thousands of this, and keep in mind this is for national security. So it's I think Alaska and Wyoming are already working well together, and we can keep doing that. And anybody that wants to do anything in this that's serious, it's a heavy lift, and we're a little bit early. So make sure you have enough money to make it through this gauntlet, but everybody's welcome that's serious and wants to get it done. I don't think it's going to take a tremendous amount of people. It takes the right people.
Before we talk a little bit about Alaska, I was curious for you first, Mike, to talk a little bit about when it was that you realized your company was going to move into nuclear technologies. I mean, we've spoken a little bit, we've emailed, I've read what's on your website, and see a deep commitment to community and economic development. And I'm just curious about that because we're talking about trying to educate and inform people. Do you know what a catalyst or a moment or a decision when you went, this is where we're going?
Yeah, there was two events that were changing for me. One was I was at Abundance 360, Peter Diamandis' group, and every year he does a recap on energy. And so I was sitting there for 3 years, and he would get to, well, and then there's nuclear, but we're not doing that, right? And then one year he completely switched, and then there's nuclear, and it's the only answer. And it was the only answer for net zero, right? So I went up to Peter afterwards and I said, what's the deal? And he said, well, it's clear to all of us now. This is the only solution. So that got me really interested because, it sounded true, and my father-in-law was in the nuclear energy. He was in some of the original microreactors that were in Wyoming and in the South Pole. And so he was always telling me nuclear was great. So it got me interested in that. And then I came to an epiphany a while after that as I was soul searching about what I wanted to do the rest of my life. I've been manufacturing my whole life, and I love it, and I'll continue doing that. But what do I want to spend the rest of my career doing? And it's to innovate energy. So I have a commitment. I think it's my life's purpose to innovate energy. So between those two things, that's what really pushed me into nuclear. And I think the nuclear energy is the only answer right now.
Well, I have a similar question for you, Joe. Just in your career path, when where you were early, and then where your career really began to focus.
So much
Not
like
too early. This is daytime conversation.
So much like BWXT, the Naval Reactors program also told me I was going to do nuclear. So I enlisted in the Navy, didn't really know much about nuclear. And I got pretty interested when I was leaving boot camp, going to a school in Orlando, and started to learn a little bit more about physics and mechanical engineering, things of that nature. So I went through 2 years of school before I was on my first submarine. So six years in the Navy, 2 years in school, 4 years on a submarine, realized it was really interesting. Got to meet a lot of interesting people. Operating a nuclear reactor, especially underwater, is a whole different paradigm from being 19 years old in boot camp. So I learned a lot that way. And then I learned that it was a real success path because of the mission-centric mentality of being on a submarine, which I really loved. So I was able to get my nuclear engineering degree while I was in the Navy, and then use my GI Bill to get another degree, master's degree in radiation physics. So to me, it was something that I learned early on. Wasn't really sure how I would apply that in my career, and I started building nuclear submarines as part of Newport News Shipbuilding, which was exciting, and then spent a couple years in semiconductor, so the tech sector. Got completely out of nuclear. It was high throughput manufacturing. It was nano architecture, learning a lot about an industry that is probably the polar opposite of nuclear. You churn out hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of semiconductor chips every year. So when I came back to nuclear, it was a little bit over 12 years ago, and I was running a thermohydraulic test program, and I started to think about the future, just like our company, just like many others in the industry were thinking. And we had a little bit of a slow start in the early 2010s, but things have reemerged, and they've reemerged because of that mission. So I go back to why mission's so important. We talk about what happens in the U.S. from a Department of Defense standpoint, how that early investment can lead to major investments by the commercial industry. And just like Mike said, his life's work is to innovate nuclear. My life's work now is to deliver nuclear. And so when we combine forces, and we combine forces with Idaho National Lab in the state of Wyoming, things are going to happen, and they're going to happen really, really fast. And so when we talk about this, even we talked about this 2 weeks ago in New York and Wyoming, things are different now than they were 2 weeks ago. And that's a huge deal to me, because it tells me that we're all applying the resources in the right manner. And then I can expect, just because of the conversations that we've been a part of since we announced the Wyoming initiative, that there is going to be a tremendous amount of investment, because we need more energy in the world. And we don't need more carbon in the world as a context to how much energy we're producing. So those are real world issues that we're going to address, and nuclear is going to have a huge part of that. So as we continue to translate what we're doing in Wyoming, what we're doing on Project Pele into microreactor deployments, I can see this coming together so much faster than I ever expected 2-3 years ago, even 6 months ago.
Which is a perfect segue to my next question. And just recognizing that there's people who have been thinking about this and working towards it in Alaska. It's been mentioned several times today. We've got Eielson Air Force Base with deployment of nuclear technology. What should we be thinking is realistic on a time frame? And then just so you can also think, my next question is, what are the top 2 or 3 things that we should be doing, putting first things first? But just start with a time frame based on what you've seen in Wyoming, and we'll start with that.
Yeah, so mid-2020s, that first microreactor will be operating. It'll be operating at Idaho National Lab. Within a few years, we will be operating the second microreactor. And then within a few years after that, we'll be operating 10 microreactors. And then it'll continue to scale up from there. So that's what I think as far as time frame goes. And what we should be doing is aggregating the demand. So we have a team of people, Eric and Josh here, that are working on that all day, every day with industrial partners. What is that real demand signal? Because it's no longer if we do nuclear, it's how. And we know when, we talked about that, but how are we going to do nuclear? So defining that and getting it right the first time and not messing it up. Do not mess it up is the most important part of this. So that delivery model is crucial, making sure that we have the input requirements totally understood, and then pull together the resources, people that really want to do this together. And then once we show off what nuclear can do, it'll continue to rise quickly from there.
Yeah, so I'll take it from the manufacturing side of it. Figuring out what BWXT needs, right? Where are the white spaces that we want to fill? Finding the people to fill those white spaces, and then find the barriers to entry and help work together to help clear those barriers to entry so that we can move at speed. Because this is really important to the USA, the consumers in the USA, for the price of power. And it's important to the world just to be able to supply the power that's net zero.
Well, one of the things I want to ask each of you is like the things we should be thinking about first. And Mike, you talked earlier about getting the right innovators and the people that are going to do it anyway, and giving them the incentives, the tools, the space. What can Alaskans do to build on some of the things that that you've seen or heard, so that we're moving in the right direction? What are the top 2 or 3 things?
Yeah, so find the leaders that are doing it anyway, and they're not going to be coming to you because they typically have their head down doing things, right? So find those people and say, hey, does this opportunity look like a match for you? Would you like to do it? How can we help you? That help can come through people resources, or just encouragement, or showing them the opportunity. It can come through funding, right? And you can really activate the right entrepreneurs, but don't expect them to welcome the government or academia with open arms, because these guys are entrepreneurs, and they're alive because they just go, right? They have to go paycheck to paycheck and payroll to payroll. So they have to move, and most of their experiences with government and with academia move way too slow. They would go broke if they stopped long enough to do that. So engaging in a thoughtful way and be serious and help them. And once they trust, they will engage and run. So be careful which entrepreneurs that you're engaging with, and be careful which people in academia or the government you're having engage with them, because there needs to be a match to mission, vision, values in those 2 things.
One of the things that I think we're realistic about, and Joe, I want you to answer that too if you've got other things that you think are the top 2 or 3, but we're often very realistic about our challenges in this state, and I'm going to ask you to help think about our advantages too. But anything to add to that top 2-3 things that we should be focused on?
Well, adding on to what Mike said, he came from the bottoms up viewpoint, which I think is really important, and then the tops down, right? So we heard from Mike Goff earlier from the Department of Energy. We have many representatives here from other government agencies. There are a lot of people driven in the government to make this happen as well and address energy security. So the investment is huge. You know, we have the investment's there. It's being able to apply that investment to make the most progress, like Mike talked about, I think is really important.
Well, and I mentioned earlier that I'm working with the University of Alaska on an Arctic-related initiative, and there's been so many synergies as, you know, through today's conversations and preparing for it. And like I said, we're often thinking from our perspective of, you know, we're far away from the market, or it's colder, or it's this or it's that. But when I think about our position in the Arctic, our position in the Pacific, much like President Pitney was saying earlier, I think we are well positioned. From what you've learned about Alaska so far, would you point to advantages that you think we have in this space?
Yeah, I think there's a huge advantage. Mostly the distributed energy demand is there, and always looking for solutions seems to be what I've heard from everybody I've talked to from Alaska. You know, it's a solutions-oriented state. And so since there is an energy demand, a distributed energy demand, there are solutions out there, and there's just a general love for the environment in Alaska. And so being able to reduce your carbon footprint and have energy security and participate in something that's really important for humankind, I think all of those things culturally will get there. Now, we're going to have to, as an industry, produce credible results to get there. But I do believe that the state of Alaska is set up perfectly for microreactors, and determining how that deployment case would make the most sense to integrate into the culture, I think is the next step.
To Alaska's advantages that you see, anything to add to that?
Yeah, the major advantage that you have is you are the customers, right? So you're paying a lot for your energy right now. You have the remote location, so you're the customer, right? If anybody has energy demand and energy problem, or are used to paying too higher prices for energy, that's Alaska. So that's number one. And then being in Wyoming and only having 500,000 people, it actually works out to the advantage. We were talking about leaning forward with the Energy Authority and the governor. That's a huge competitive advantage, being able to lean forward and being able to talk to your voters and get things done. And being a small state, that's the advantage. And I'm sure that you have, just like Wyoming, you know, being a small, sparsely populated state, you also have a lot of people that just get things done, and they know how to do things, and they're willing to do the tough work. That is a huge advantage. I live in Phoenix in the winter, and I live in Wyoming in the summer. It's a completely different culture. I thought when I moved to Phoenix, my problems were solved. I got 3 million people to draw from to hire. I can hire better talent in Wyoming than I can in Phoenix, Arizona, because you raise people like that, right? You will raise people that can do things. So, you just have to find the people that really want to stand up and do it.
Well, I want to be, before we, I know our time is going quickly, I want to talk a little bit about the supply chain. We have some unique things about our state, and some of that is the military, strong military base, but also military people who stay in our state often, from the Coast Guard to Army to Air Force. So, that's something that's part of our people and our economy. Certainly our Alaska Native organizations and tribes that not only are, thousands of years of living in our state and indigenous knowledge, but also have some unique contracting and funding opportunities. So when we think about supply chain, think about, can we, where do you see we might have a niche in helping in our state or helping in our region? In anything that you would share with our audience this morning? Just what are the needs, and how do we, what should we be focused on there?
So I think that having the military here is a huge advantage, because the military is already priming the pump with Project Pele. They always prime the pump, right? They're always the first buyers. So have a lot of military here. I think that's an opportunity to enter the supply chain and have the reactors here that are the pump's primed by them, and then you move it to to the other mining companies and others that need it. And other than that, it's going back to find the entrepreneurs that want to do this and introduce them to the people. They can watch the Wyoming Innovative Entrepreneurs website and they can see all of the parts and all of the other things that are needed, and that's going to show them the white spaces, and then they have to just choose which ones they want, because it's all a lot of work and it's an investment. So.
Well, we just recently recognized the leaders in Alaska business industry, and I think as people become familiar with our state, they are often surprised at the global reach and global partnerships of people with deep roots here.
Yeah, I would just add the Alaska industry has figured out how to go through resource extraction in a very, very cold climate. This isn't as hard as that, I don't think, so I think that's good. And just having that initiative, much like in Wyoming, we have large industry in Wyoming that are very focused on energy security. So the same thing will happen and will need to happen here in Alaska. So I see that as an enormous advantage as well.
Well, and part of what I think I expect to happen is from today, we're going to continue expanding the conversation. Is there anything that you've had from your own experience or is seen others in terms of helping diffuse the misperceptions and the myths?
Yeah, it's just the obvious, it's communication, right? And talk more about the technology as it currently stands, and then understand this is different than nuclear reactors have been applied in the past on grid nuclear power. And it's really different as any nuclear or any energy product has ever been applied in industry or for household electricity. So think of it that way. Think of it as being different, and then communicate and be transparent on the facts. And people ask good questions when you can communicate those facts. And then there becomes a good dialogue, and from a good dialogue, the opinions become changed and become more favorable for important technology like nuclear.
Anything on myths or misperceptions or real hard questions that have to be answered?
Yeah, I've taken that on as one of my jobs, is to educate people. So I look for people, especially leaders, that think nuclear is bad, and I welcome the opportunity to have that conversation with them. And you have to approach it in a way that's not going to make them feel bad about their position, right, or the conspiracy theories that they've signed up on. Because I have some brilliant people that were completely convinced that nuclear was terrible and going to ruin the earth. That once we started sharing information, and my go-to is always to call Steve Altmeyer with Idaho National Labs and say, well, this guy's telling me this, what is this? And then he gives me the facts. So between Idaho National Labs and other resources, get them the truth, right? And then be open to hear the truth from them if they have better information. And I've been able to convince half a dozen or a dozen people that were completely convinced it was evil and that I was going to ruin the world and kill people, and completely change that, which is important. So I think you get the leaders that feel that way, and show them the truth, and then they will, they'll pass that information to all the other people, and just let it trickle down to change the collective consciousness of the human race. We need to do that with nuclear, and we need to do that with radiation, because those are the two things that people are afraid of, and just showing them the truth and getting them with great people that can thoughtfully answer their questions and compare facts. It works.
Well, gentlemen, our chat time has come to an end. Please help me in thanking them for their experience and what they've shared this morning.